What would you do if the person you trusted most turned out to be your greatest betrayer? Gregory Bryant, a charismatic Texas CEO, seemed to have it all: immense wealth, unshakable power, and a picture-perfect family life. But beneath the polished exterior lay a scandal so shocking it would unravel everything. His forbidden affair with his young and vulnerable niece, Tamara Bryant, set off a chain of events that spiraled into a horrifying tale of obsession, betrayal, and brutal murder, forever shattering the lives of everyone involved. This isn't just a story of betrayal and murder, it's a chilling look at how unchecked power, manipulation, and desperation can destroy lives. Gregory's obsession with maintaining his reputation came at the ultimate cost, proving that no amount of wealth can cover up the darkest secrets. Before we dive into this jaw-dropping story of power and betrayal, don't miss a single detail. Hit the subscribe button and stay tuned to Crime Chronicles, where we expose the shocking truths behind real-life tragedies that defy imagination. Gregory Bryant was a man admired by many. At 47, he was the CEO of a thriving energy company in Houston, Texas, a self-made millionaire whose hard work and charisma had earned him both wealth and respect. His home, a sprawling mansion in an exclusive gated community, reflected his success, complete with a well-dressed wife, Sharon, who stood proudly by his side. Their lives seemed like a fairy tale, but beneath the surface was a complicated and little-discussed family story. Tasha Simmons, Gregory's 16-year-old niece, had moved in with the Bryants few months earlier after a devastating car accident claimed her parents' lives. With no other immediate family, Gregory and Sharon had opened their doors to Tasha, presenting it as an act of selfless generosity. Tasha was a quiet, thoughtful young girl who initially struggled to adjust to her new life in the Bryant household. Having grown up in a modest home, the opulence of Gregory's world felt foreign and overwhelming. Gregory took her under his wing, guiding her through this unfamiliar lifestyle and offering her what he called a second chance at life. Their connection was solidified through shared memories of Tasha's late father, Gregory's younger brother. The two men had been close growing up, and Gregory often reminisced about their childhood adventures to comfort Tasha. This shared grief brought them closer, and Tasha leaned on her uncle as she navigated the loss of her parents. Gregory also found ways to make Tasha feel included in his world. He introduced her to high-end dining and luxurious vacations, showering her with gifts he claimed were meant to make up for everything she'd lost. From designer handbags to expensive jewelry, these gestures were presented as tokens of affection and care. At first, Tasha viewed Gregory's attention as genuine kindness. He often described her as the daughter he never had, and she felt fortunate to have someone who cared for her so deeply. But over time, the relationship began to shift. Gregory's gestures became more personal, compliments on her appearance that bordered on inappropriate, his touch lingering a moment too long, and private conversations that felt unusually intimate. One evening, during a quiet dinner while Sharon was away visiting friends, Gregory shared stories about his own struggles. He spoke of the pressures of his high-powered career, the loneliness that often accompanied success, and how much he appreciated having someone like Tasha to talk to. "You're not just family," he said softly. "You're my rock." Tasha felt uncomfortable but didn't know how to respond. She tried to dismiss the unease as her own overthinking, reminding herself of all Gregory had done for her. She owed him everything, or so she believed. The neighbors and close family friends viewed the Bryants as heroes for taking Tasha in during such a difficult time. They marveled at how seamlessly she fit into their lives, often commenting on how lucky Tasha was to have Gregory as her guiding light. But inside the grand walls of the Bryant mansion, the perfect family image was beginning to crack. Gregory's carefully crafted persona as a generous protector concealed a darker truth, a growing obsession that would ultimately unravel the lives of everyone involved. What began as a bond of family and shared grief between Gregory and Tasha slowly morphed into something twisted and forbidden. Gregory, a man who prided himself on control and charm, saw Tasha's vulnerability not as a trait to nurture but as an opportunity to exploit. At first, Gregory's affection seemed harmless. He often referred to Tasha as the light of his life, someone who brought joy into his otherwise stressful existence. But as months passed, his gestures became more pointed. He began complimenting her in ways that went beyond familial admiration. "You're so beautiful, Tasha. Do you know how lucky any guy would be to have you?" he'd say, his tone lingering just a little too long. Tasha initially brushed off these moments as her uncle's way of boosting her confidence. She rationalized his actions, reminding herself that Gregory had always been a supportive figure. Yet, there were instances that unsettled her, like the night he offered to give her a shoulder massage after dinner. The touch felt less like comfort and more like an intrusion, but she convinced herself it wasn't intentional. Gregory was strategic. He never rushed, carefully laying the groundwork for what he saw as a deeper connection. He began isolating Tasha subtly, ensuring their moments together were private. When Sharon was away on a business trip or social outing, Gregory would plan intimate dinners at home, complete with her favorite meals and expensive wine. During one such evening, Gregory crossed the line. Tasha had been telling him about her struggles adjusting to life without her parents, her voice tinged with sadness. Gregory leaned closer, his eyes soft with what she thought was empathy. "You're not just family to me, Tasha. You're everything," he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Before she could react, he kissed her. Tasha froze, her mind reeling. She pulled away, stammering, "Gregory, you're my uncle." But Gregory, ever the manipulator, twisted the narrative. "Tasha, you've brought so much light into my life, I can't ignore what I feel for you." Confused and vulnerable, Tasha didn't know how to respond. She was torn between the familial loyalty she felt and the growing unease about Gregory's actions. He had been her protector, her guide, the person she trusted most in the world. How could he betray that trust? Over time, Gregory used his influence and power to deepen his hold on Tasha. He showered her with gifts, lavish trips, and constant praise. He reassured her that what they shared was special and meant to be. Tasha, still grieving her parents and lacking a strong support system, began to believe his words. But the relationship was far from equal. Gregory wielded power over Tasha in every aspect, emotionally, financially, and psychologically. He controlled the narrative, framing their affair as something beautiful rather than what it truly was, manipulation and exploitation. Tasha's internal conflict grew. She knew what they were doing was wrong, yet she felt trapped. Gregory's charm was intoxicating, and his promises of a life filled with love and security were hard to resist. At the same time, she feared what would happen if the truth ever came out. As the months passed, the affair became more consuming. Gregory's obsession with Tasha deepened, and his once perfect facade began to crack. He became possessive, demanding more of her time and attention. Tasha found herself retreating from the world, bound by secrets she couldn't share. What Tasha didn't realize was that Gregory's need for control would soon spiral out of hand, leading to a series of events that would turn their forbidden relationship into a harrowing nightmare. The relationship between Gregory and Tasha had shifted gradually, blurring the lines between family and something far more insidious. Gregory's charm, authority, and calculated kindness had manipulated Tasha into a secret affair. Late-night conversations in the living room turned into stolen moments, each one pushing boundaries until the affair fully consumed them both. Gregory's ability to control the situation depended on Tasha's isolation and his constant reassurance that their relationship was special. At first, Tasha believed him, convincing herself that the connection they shared was genuine love. She was young, grieving the loss of her parents, and vulnerable to Gregory's influence. What began as subtle touches and seemingly harmless gestures escalated into something much darker. A cycle of manipulation that kept Tasha emotionally trapped. Months into the affair, Tasha began to feel unwell. Exhaustion, nausea, and a missed period sent alarm bells ringing. At first, she dismissed the symptoms, attributing them to stress and her chaotic living situation. But as the days passed, the truth became impossible to ignore. A pregnancy test confirmed her worst fears: she was carrying Gregory's child. The revelation left Tasha reeling. Fear and confusion battled with anger and guilt. How had she allowed herself to become so entangled in Gregory's web? And what would this mean for her future? Confronting Gregory was the hardest decision she had ever made. She waited until he returned home one evening, his tie loosened and the faint scent of expensive cologne still clinging to his suit. "Gregory," Tasha said, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." He immediately sensed her unease and closed the door behind him. "What's wrong?" he asked, feigning concern. Tasha took a deep breath, clutching the pregnancy test in her hand. "I'm pregnant," she blurted out, her eyes filling with tears. The color drained from Gregory's face as her words sank in. For a moment, he was speechless, staring at her as though he hadn't heard correctly. Then his panic took over. "Tasha, do you realize what this means?" he hissed, his voice low but urgent. "You can't keep it. This will ruin everything, for both of us." Tasha's tears turned to fury. "Ruin everything for you, you mean?" she shouted. "This is your child, Gregory. And I won't just pretend this never happened." Gregory's mask of control slipped, revealing the depths of his fear. He paced the room, muttering about the consequences: his marriage, his career, his reputation. "Tasha, you don't understand. If this gets out, it'll destroy me." "And what about me?" she countered, her voice breaking. "You used me, Gregory. You made me believe this was something real, something I could trust. Now I'm left with the consequences while you're worried about your perfect little life?" Gregory stopped pacing and turned to face her, his expression hardening. "You can't have this baby, Tasha," he said firmly. "You don't know what you're doing." But Tasha was resolute. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of strength. "I'm keeping it," she declared. "And if you think I'm going to keep quiet about what you've done, you're wrong. Everyone will know the truth." Gregory's panic turned to desperation as the reality of her words set in. He knew his carefully constructed world was on the verge of collapse, and he would do anything to protect it. Gregory Bryant had always been a man who thrived on control. From his boardroom decisions to his meticulously curated public image, everything in his life was calculated. But Tasha's pregnancy and her determination to expose their affair threatened to unravel his entire existence. For the first time, Gregory felt powerless, and it terrified him. In the days following Tasha's revelation, Gregory tried to reason with her. He approached her with calm words and calculated charm, hoping to sway her decision. "Tasha," he began during one conversation, his voice soft and measured, "this isn't about me. It's about what's best for you. For us. A child, it's too much right now. You're too young, and this will only complicate your life." But Tasha's resolve was unshakable. "Stop pretending this is about me," she snapped. "You're only thinking about yourself, Gregory. I'm not getting rid of my baby, and you can't make me." Her refusal left Gregory feeling cornered. The stakes were too high: his wife would leave him, his position as CEO would be jeopardized, and his name would be dragged through the mud. He couldn't allow that to happen. His initial desperation morphed into something darker, a determination to silence Tasha by any means necessary. Realizing that persuasion wouldn't work, Gregory turned to drastic measures. He contacted two men he knew from his connections in Houston's underworld, offering them a substantial sum of money to handle the situation. The plan was simple: the men would abduct Tasha, take her to an isolated location, and force her to terminate the pregnancy. The night of the kidnapping, Tasha was in her room, oblivious to the danger lurking outside. The men broke into the house under the cover of darkness, using the spare key Gregory had provided. Tasha awoke to the sound of footsteps, her heart racing as she realized something was wrong. When the intruders burst into her room, Tasha fought back with everything she had. She screamed, kicked, and clawed at her attackers, her survival instincts kicking in. The commotion woke up a neighbor, who turned on their lights and startled the men. Fearing exposure, they fled the scene, leaving Tasha shaken but unharmed. The botched kidnapping infuriated Gregory. He called the men that night, his voice filled with rage. "You idiots! You were supposed to handle this quietly, and now you've drawn attention," he shouted. The men, realizing the risk of continuing the plan, demanded more money or threatened to back out entirely. Gregory, now more desperate than ever, decided to take matters into his own hands. Gregory's next move was bolder and more reckless. Under the guise of wanting to reconcile and make things right, he invited Tasha to meet him at a secluded property he owned on the outskirts of Houston. Tasha, still wary but longing for closure, reluctantly agreed. When she arrived, Gregory's demeanor was calm but unnervingly detached. "I just want to talk," he said, motioning for her to sit. "We need to figure out how to move forward." But as the conversation unfolded, Tasha sensed something was wrong. Gregory's calm exterior began to crack, revealing the desperation simmering beneath. When she reiterated her decision to keep the baby and go public with the affair, his facade shattered. "You're ruining everything." Gregory exploded, slamming his fist on the table. "Do you think anyone will believe you over me? I've worked too hard for this life, Tasha. I won't let you destroy it." As the tension escalated, Tasha realized the lengths Gregory was willing to go to maintain his control. She stood up, ready to leave, but Gregory blocked her path. "You're not going anywhere," he said coldly. What began as a desperate attempt to protect his secrets was spiraling into something far more sinister, setting the stage for a tragedy that no one could have foreseen. Tasha's refusal to back down was the final straw for Gregory Bryant. For months, he had been consumed with fear of exposure, of his reputation crumbling, of losing everything he had worked for. But with every attempt to control the situation failing, Gregory was no longer a man seeking resolution. He had become a man driven by an overwhelming need to silence his niece permanently. The plan was meticulously crafted. Gregory knew that any sign of chaos, any slip-up, could draw suspicion to his role in Tasha's fate. He couldn't afford that. Instead, he would use the isolation of his secluded property to his advantage, where no one could hear Tasha's cries, where he could erase any trace of what he had done. The evening began as a seemingly normal meeting. Tasha arrived at the property as she had agreed, expecting a calm conversation, perhaps even one of reconciliation. But Gregory had no intention of reconciling. He had already made up his mind, she would not walk out of that house alive. As Tasha entered the spacious, dimly lit living room, Gregory greeted her with a tight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He guided her toward a seat by the fireplace, the air thick with tension. He had prepared the room, candles lit, the fire crackling, and the soft hum of classical music playing in the background. It was all an illusion, a facade to hide the darkness he had planned. "Sit down," he told her in a voice that was unnervingly calm. "We need to talk about the baby." Tasha, her face flushed with frustration and fear, crossed her arms. "There's nothing left to say, Gregory. I'm keeping the child, and I'm going public." Gregory took a step closer, his expression darkening. "You really don't understand, do you?" he muttered. "You think you can just destroy my life and get away with it?" Tasha's heart pounded in her chest, and she instinctively took a step back. Something in Gregory's voice, the coldness, the malice, sent a chill down her spine. "Gregory, what are you talking about?" Without warning, Gregory lunged at her. He grabbed her by the shoulders, forcing her into the chair with startling strength. Tasha tried to break free, her instinct screaming at her to run, but she was trapped. She struggled against his grip, kicking and pushing, but he was relentless. "You have no idea what you're doing to me," Gregory growled, his breath coming faster. He was losing control. He had worked his entire life to build an empire, and now one mistake he could never take back was threatening to bring it all crashing down. With brutal force, he yanked Tasha's head back, exposing her throat. In one swift motion, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a silver letter opener, sharp, thin, and deadly. Tasha's eyes widened in horror as she realized what he was about to do. "Gregory, no," she screamed, her voice full of terror. But it was too late. With a sudden, violent motion, Gregory plunged the letter opener deep into Tasha's throat, silencing her scream. Blood spurted from the wound, splattering across the floor and soaking into her clothes. Tasha's eyes fluttered as she gasped for breath, but the damage was too severe. She fought for air, her body trembling, but within moments, she collapsed into unconsciousness. Gregory stood over her, breathing heavily, his heart racing. His hands were covered in her blood, but he couldn't stop. He had done it. He had silenced her for good. As the reality of what he had just done settled in, panic gripped him. He couldn't leave her body there, not in a place so easily traced back to him. He quickly wiped the blade clean, discarded it in the fireplace, and dragged Tasha's lifeless body into the trunk of his car. Once he was sure there were no signs of a struggle, he drove to a remote part of the outskirts of Houston, an area he knew well, isolated, deserted, the perfect place to bury the body and make it disappear. Under the cover of darkness, he dug a shallow grave, lossing her in like discarded trash. He covered her body with dirt and debris, wiping the sweat from his brow. No one would ever know. Back at his home, Gregory meticulously cleaned up the crime scene. He threw away the blood-soaked clothes and removed any trace of evidence. His mind raced as he strategized his next move. He would report Tasha as missing. Her sudden disappearance would seem like an of life. No one would suspect him. But as Gregory returned to his mansion and shut the door behind him, he felt an unsettling presence in the air. Something was wrong. The weight of his actions began to sink in, and it gnawed at him, but there was no turning back now. Pamela Bryant, Gregory's wife, had noticed something off about her husband in the days leading up to Tasha's disappearance. His behavior was erratic, his mood swings unpredictable. And when Tasha vanished without a trace, Pamela's suspicions only deepened. She had never known Gregory to act this way before, and as the hours passed without any word from Tasha, Pamela grew more certain that something was terribly wrong. As days passed and no one could find Tasha, Pamela grew increasingly insistent on a deeper investigation. Her gut told her that Gregory knew more than he was letting on, and she wasn't about to stop until the truth was uncovered. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place, but Pamela was walking into a storm of lies and deception that would take everything she had to expose. The disappearance of Tasha Simmons didn't sit right with Detective Carla Jenkins from the very start. While the case initially seemed like another missing persons report, Jenkins' sharp instincts told her there was more lurking beneath the surface. It wasn't the first time she'd seen a case that appeared to be one thing but turned out to be something far more sinister. Jenkins, a seasoned detective with the Houston Police Department, was known for her meticulous attention to detail. As soon as she was assigned to the case, she set out to uncover what had truly happened to Tasha. Her first move was to speak with Pamela Bryant, who was distraught over her niece's sudden disappearance. Pamela had already voiced her suspicions, sensing that her husband, Gregory, was involved. Though she had no concrete proof, her intuition was sharp. Jenkins dug into Gregory's background, something that seemed like an obvious starting point but quickly revealed troubling patterns. Gregory Bryant, the wealthy CEO, had a history of controlling behavior and a well-documented reputation for secrecy, but Jenkins noticed something odd. Gregory had been very specific about when Tasha vanished, even suggesting she had simply left on her own accord. Too tidy. Too rehearsed. Then, a breakthrough came when Jenkins uncovered a hidden phone from Tasha's belongings. This phone hadn't been reported in the initial investigation, and it was clear it had been intentionally overlooked. The phone revealed text messages and photos between Tasha and Gregory. They were deeply intimate messages, far beyond what a niece and uncle should ever share. What began as casual banter slowly escalated to something more, something darker. Jenkins carefully read through the messages, piecing together a history of manipulation, coercion, and threats that painted a chilling portrait of Gregory's control over Tasha. But it was the phone's final, desperate message that solidified Jenkins' suspicions. Just days before Tasha's disappearance, Gregory had sent a chilling text: "If you go public, it will destroy everything. You know what I'll do." Tasha had replied, "You'll never get away with it. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth." This text was a turning point in the case. Jenkins now knew that Gregory's motives were not just based on preserving a marriage or family image. He was desperately trying to silence Tasha before she could expose him for the affair and its consequences. The next critical piece of evidence came when Jenkins discovered a series of financial records. On the surface, they looked like regular transactions, but Jenkins noticed large withdrawals from Gregory's personal accounts, paid to anonymous people under false names. After tracking down the payment trail, it was clear that Gregory had hired a group of men to intimidate Tasha. These men were supposed to make her disappear, but something went wrong. Then came the body. The location where Tasha had been buried was no coincidence. It was a secluded, wooded area that Gregory frequented for business retreats, a place that had never been checked in the search for Tasha. A group of volunteers, led by Jenkins, stumbled upon the grave during a routine search in the area. It was shallow, hastily covered with branches and dirt, barely concealing the body. When Tasha's body was exhumed, it was clear she had been killed in a violent, calculated manner. The forensic team confirmed what Jenkins had already suspected: Tasha had been murdered shortly after the kidnapping, and her body had been left to rot in the woods. The method of killing, the controlled precision of the crime, pointed directly to Gregory's involvement. With the evidence piling up, Gregory's arrest was imminent. The shocking trial that followed gripped the nation. As Gregory sat in the defendant's chair, his once confident exterior crumbled. His legal team tried desperately to mount a defense, focusing on Gregory's supposed emotional distress over Tasha's threats to expose their affair. They argued that the relationship had been consensual and that Gregory had acted out of fear and panic. But the jury wasn't swayed. The evidence was undeniable. After weeks of intense testimony and heart-wrenching details about Tasha's life and death, the jury deliberated. The verdict was clear. Gregory Bryant was convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder. His once glittering empire, built on power, lies, and manipulation, collapsed in an instant. The courtroom erupted in shock and disbelief as the judge sentenced Gregory to 35 years in prison without the possibility of parole. His wealth, his status, his carefully curated life, none of it could save him now. The devastation Gregory caused would haunt his family for years to come. His wife, Pamela, was left to grapple with the monstrous actions of the man she had once loved, while the world was left to ponder how a man with everything could destroy it all in the pursuit of a secret so vile. Gregory Bryant's conviction marked the end of a tragic chapter, but for those left behind, the family torn apart, the life lost, there would be no closure, only the haunting memory of a betrayal so dark that it would forever stain the lives of everyone involved. This tragic story uncovers the devastating consequences of abuse and manipulation within a family. Gregory's horrific betrayal of trust and his relentless pursuit of power and control led him down a path of violence and deceit that ultimately destroyed an innocent life. Tasha's death was not a mere consequence of a flawed relationship, it was the result of exploitation, control, and an utter disregard for her well-being. Could Tasha have escaped Gregory's manipulation before it led to tragedy? What does this case teach us about the dangers of unchecked desire and the length some will go to in order to protect their secrets? If this story shocked you, make sure to subscribe to Crime Chronicles for more stories that reveal the dark truths behind the most harrowing betrayals and murders.